recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And would say that very proud to be on this committee. Missouri's had a long history of service on this committee, and look forward to working with all my fellow committee members. As you know, there's been a lot of discussion of China, and rightfully so. And as part of their ambition to project power across the world, they have been more aggressive in building military bases and partnerships with countries like Sri Lanka and the Solomon Islands, Cambodia, and a lot of Chinese firms now own and operate assets in 96 ports in 53 countries, all of which can be used to establish logistics and intelligence networks and strategic locations, enabling China to project its power globally. This network poses significant threats to the United States and our allies, there's no doubt about that, particularly if China can cut off access that our military needs during difficult times or times of conflict. I guess, Mr. Zakim, maybe direct this to you initially, because I don't have a ton of time. I want to get through at least a couple of questions. What specific actions should the Department of Defense undertake to ensure that China does not gain further access to ports throughout the world, especially in the South China Sea?
Thank you, Senator. I think the critical thing for the Department of Defense, there are other pieces for a government to deal with China's reach globally in the ways you've described, is that we need to push out our logistics capability. The notion that somehow we're going to rely on shipping or transport aircraft to deliver forces, material to the battlefield like we did in the last century is not going to happen. And that's why I think you see some of these memos coming out for those military leaders focused on pre-positioning, on the transcom type issues are most concerned, because it's about getting there first with speed and making sure the kill chain is not reliant on pulling back a capability, an ocean plus away.
And then, while we're talking about China, which I certainly believe is our biggest threat, what do they believe is their biggest weakness in a potential conflict with a foreign adversary, particularly the United States? How do they view that?
I continue to believe, and I defer to Dr. Lin here, I know studies this as well, is that our undersea capability is something that I think spooks them. That's the one I start with, is why I think we need to double down on it. They don't have the answer. The quicker we can move from manned to unmanned, as well as sustaining the current manned capability, is our comparative advantage, and we should be investing in that in a significant, urgent, speedy fashion.
Senator, I think one of the Chinese don't say this quite explicitly. I think one of their biggest weaknesses that they see is actually their personnel, because they unlike the United States, where we have had a significant experience fighting different types of wars, they have had very limited fighting experience. Even though they have the equipment, there's no guarantee that transitioning from even a large-scale exercise to a minor conflict, they would be successful, much less a very high-end contingency, one of the most complex operations we can think about in terms of the Chinese amphibious invasion of Taiwan.
I just open this up to all three of you for probably the last question that I have time for, but you've all spoken about threats of foreign actors, especially in Western Asia. One concern that I have is that we remain focused on obviously those important threats, but might ignore threats closer to home, to our own borders. What action should the department take to protect our national interests in the Western Hemisphere, specifically the southern border and in the Panama Canal Zone? And by the way, how should we engage Central and South America in some of these efforts?
Yes, I mean, that obviously picks up on the question that Senator Kaine raised, and I analysed the problem, but actually Mr. Zakim came up with a few solutions here in terms of our relationships with some of those critical countries. I think we need to assess the strength of our relationships with our Western Hemisphere allies, thinking about how we can capitalise on the recent presidential visit to Brazil, and how Brazil can play a larger role, not just in the region, but internationally, because of its role in the BRICS relationship with China and Russia and India. Thinking about our relations with Mexico, the health of that relationship overall, not just as Mexico as a problem, but how this can be strengthened as an alliance and as a relationship going forward. I think we need to have a whole-scale assessment of the nature of our military, diplomatic, trade, as Mr. Zakim relationships said, and pay particular attention to those countries where China and also Russia have penetrated in terms of their military or intelligence investments, for example.
I just add, Senator, that Plan Colombia was a great success. I think what I've read and in conversation, that's at risk. That's a model that needs to be replicated, and we need to strengthen it in Colombia, and that's coming at the military security cooperation plane, and I think it would have the effects that you rightfully point out we need in the Western Hemisphere.
Thank you.